Welcome back into Cullman today. With this segment, Tony Glover representing the Alabama Cooperative Extension Agency, the Cullman office, and he's here today. We're going to talk about vegetable gardening. And Tony, I've got to say, or I've got to ask, what should be in the ground at this time? This is already almost the 1st of June.
Yeah, you know, everything was so late this year because it was so cold for so long, and the soil just wasn't warming. And the questions that I had were people said, I planted and it's just sitting there, or it didn't come up because the soil was so cold. But now things have finally warmed up and we're going full blast. The disadvantage of getting such a late start is we tend to more coincide with the pest flare up. That's one reason people like to plant things early. They like to start from transplants rather than seed. So there's advantages in doing that. One of the big advantages is you can get a plant up big enough to withstand some pest pressure better, and it also gets ahead of the pest. Because pests coincide with temperature as well. So they're a little bit later, but not quite as late as we are this year planting, just because that soil was so cold. So everything that you can plant, warm season crops, even our most cold sensitive things like peppers and tomatoes and eggplants and things like that, people could have already planted by now, probably should have. It's not too late though. If they haven't planted those crops, they can. And there are things that are relatively short season, warm season crops, like zucchinis and squash of various kinds and cucumbers. They can kind of be planted in succession all summer. And what I encourage people to do is take something that's really short season, like a squash. It produces for about a month, and then it kind of starts going down, and usually it gets covered up with disease and pest. It's easier and cheaper just to start new ones about every 2 to 3 weeks. You only need a couple or 3 squash plants to give you all you want.
That's true.
So instead of trying to keep, you know, these older plants that are on their way out and pest prone, trying to keep them alive with a lot of pesticides, just plant you a new one, because it'll be producing really quick. So every couple weeks, plant you a couple more squash plants.
And pull the other ones up and
get rid of the other ones and get them out of the garden and into the compost pile and covered up.
It's a great idea.
So that if there is disease and pest on there, they don't reinfect the new plants.
That's a great idea.
So you're really trying to replace them before they get too covered with pests and diseases. So you can do that with those shorter season crops that tend to make really fast from the time you plant them from seed. We may have planted, like I do, I like to plant a few transplants of squash to start with, because I want to get it as early as I can, enjoy it. But then after 2 or 3 weeks and the soil's warmed up, I plant some more from seed.
I love it.
Because they'll come up really quick. You don't really need to use transplants at that stage because they grow so fast. And just start you some more regularly through the season. Now longer season crops like tomatoes and pepper, then normally we try to keep the plants alive. So they keep producing. But even those, I suggest that people start them some new ones, usually about the end of June. And they're easy to do, particularly on tomatoes. Tomatoes, you may have noticed, get bushy and they'll make little side branches. When those little side branches get about 6 inches long, you can pinch them out and root them in a glass of water. Just stick them in a glass of water, and they'll make new roots, and then you'll have you a new plant of the same variety that you took it off of, that you can plant for later. So if that plant starts to die and go down, you'll have you some new plants coming on. So that's a good way to do it as well. They are going to be a lot longer producing than, say, squash. But still, you want to start a second crop sometime in late June.
Well, you'll have tomatoes in August and September.
That's right.
Wonderful idea. I love that.
If you just planted that one crop, they're going to really start fizzling out when it gets really hot in August.
July and August.
And you're like, oh, all my tomatoes are over with. But if you started some fresh plants, you could
would have them. So I mean, that would create the longer growing season, certainly, because we have hot weather up until October.
That's right. You can produce tomatoes here if we don't get a hard freeze, usually way on out into October, if you started some fresh plants in midsummer.
Can you plant, I've been out recently and seen where people are putting them sometimes in flower beds. Is that okay to do that? Just in an established, like if you have a area in your yard?
You know, I see a lot of people kind of doing mixed plantings where they're actually mixing edibles in with ornamentals.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
The only caution I give people when they do that is they need to realize that some of the pesticides that are labeled for ornamentals are not labeled for their vegetables. So if they're using, let's say, for example, a systemic material, a systemic insecticide that they apply to the soil that may keep whiteflies off your gardenia.
Okay.
Well, if a tomato is near it, it can also pick up that chemical, and it's not labeled for the use on tomatoes. So you have to be cautious with what pesticides you use in a mixed planting. Nothing wrong with mixing them. And as a matter of fact, a lot of times it helps with the pest pressure, because the more diversity you have in a planting bed, the harder it is for pests to zero in on a particular crop. If you've got a row of tomatoes, it is no trouble for the tomato hornworm to find your tomatoes.
Oh my goodness.
But if you've got a tomato mixed in with some other things,
it's harder for him to find?
It's much harder for him to detect it. So it's kind of a good way to reduce the amount of pesticides you have to use, just because it's harder for insects to find in a mixed planting.
Okay.
So for home gardeners, that's practical. It's not practical for a farmer to do that, but it is practical for a home gardener, and it certainly can reduce the pesticides they have to use.
Great, great idea. We've got some pictures we're going to take a look at very quickly.
We do have a couple publications I wanted to make people aware of. One is the Alabama Vegetable Gardener publication from our office. It's a very nice, it's actually a book. It's you know, about 30 pages long, but it has everything you need to know, from planting to preparing your soil, to liming your soil, to fertilization, to major pest issues that you may see, kind of a troubleshooting guide on how to identify problems in the garden. So there's just a wealth of information in this publication, even down to weed issues and pest issues.
I was going to say, boy, now that is one thing, vegetable varieties, that is one thing that people sometimes, and I'm bad about it, if weeds get out of control, I just want to give up. You know, you just want to give up.
The key to weed control is don't let it get ahead of you.
Don't let it get ahead of you.
Because if it gets ahead of you, it can be discouraging.
Flower beds or vegetables, you're right.
You know, the other thing I try to encourage people, particularly if they're beginning gardeners or maybe they're more elderly and they're scaling back, is rather than just quit gardening. If you're one of these that used to plant a half-acre garden, just get smaller and be more intensive, and maybe even go to raised bed gardenings, which are easier for folks like me that have joint problems. It's hard to bend down, to garden in raised beds. And that's certainly easier for senior citizens to do, but it makes it easier to do the things like weeding, because it's more at the height that you can easily clean things out. So it's, rather than quitting, just scale back the size and maybe do some of this mixed planting where I've got some container vegetables growing in with my ornamentals.
See, I love that too.
So that's a good way to do it as well.
It really is. And so pick up one of those vegetable gardeners at the office. And you know, garden bugs are right up there with the weeds. You know,
that's the big one we're getting right now, is people are starting to see the insects. And I mentioned we've got a late start, and so the insects are really more coinciding with production this year. So we're seeing a lot of pest problems early.
But they're not all bad, though, are they?
They're not all bad, and this is what I really want to encourage people, because I'll often get questions where people will call and say, what can I spray on my tomatoes to kill the bugs? Well, my first question is, what kind of damage are you seeing? And if they're not seeing damage, then maybe that's not a pest that they need to be spraying for. So we really want to discourage people from the attitude, and I'll admit, even I had this attitude years ago. Well, I'll just try to prevent insect problems, so I'll just spray every week or so. Well, what we found out over time is with the broad spectrum insecticides, when you do that, you kill not only the bad bugs, but you kill the good bugs. And the good bugs are helping control the bad bugs. So for instance, if we use a product like 7, which may have an appropriate use if you're targeting a specific insect, but if you used it once a week, you would immediately start to see an increase in aphid population and probably mites. which are
Okay.
very devastating sucking type insects that usually don't cause us a big problem in the vegetable garden unless we overspray and
Okay.
kill the insects that kill them. Things like the lady beetle, that's a good guy,
Right.
that are eating the mites and eating the aphids, and we spray 7 and kill them as well.
Oh, wow.
So I just want to encourage people to, one, maybe refer to our publication
Right.
called Garden Bugs. And you can actually identify by crop which pests are likely to be a problem. There's good line drawings where they can look and see if that's the insect they're seeing.
Okay.
And when the numbers get big enough that they are a problem,
Right.
treat specifically for them with the right product rather than just routinely treating every few days.
Great idea.
And then also there's some information on the good guys.
Okay.
So they'll learn to identify what are the bugs that are actually helping me
Sure.
in the garden. And if I see good populations of those, maybe I won't have to spray
You
at
won't
all.
have to spray, yeah.
Or I can use something really safe,
Safe.
like a safer soap that
Yes.
basically does,
Love the
it
soap.
smothers the insects, like aphids, soft-bodied insects, but it doesn't hurt the ladybird beetles.
See.
So there's things that we can do to reduce the amount of spraying we have to do, or to use safer products
And just make it safe, because you don't really want to put, it makes me nervous to put all that stuff on my vegetables, especially if I have to buy them and not know what they put on there.
And what most people don't realize is that most products, most pesticides, have a waiting period. And it'll tell you on the label somewhere, if you spray this product, don't eat this for so many days
Wow.
after you spray it. Well, you need to know that.
Absolutely.
Because that product has been deemed to be harmful if
Sure.
you eat it before that. So you need to be both following the label,
Yes.
and always wash your vegetables good. Not
Very
only
good.
for pesticides that you might have applied,
Right.
but they could contact the soil that has organisms that could be harmful to you. So you want to make sure everything that you harvest before you eat it, you wash it really good.
Very, very good. And that's one of the reasons that we encourage you to have your own, garden. And like Tony said, you don't have to do a big one. Scale back a little bit and just do
And you
something
know what
small.
it's been sprayed with if
You
it's your
know,
garden.
don't you, if it's your garden.
That's
and
right.
It's such an important thing. So always know where your food comes from. That's a big, I'm on that big kick and have been for a while, and I think more and more people are doing that
And
now.
even
don't you?
farmers more and more are going to these sorts of methods where they're spraying minimally.
Right.
And there's several reasons. One is they don't want to kill the good bugs either.
Right.
But secondly, these products are very expensive.
Yes.
So they use them extremely judiciously.
Good.
The days are gone when chemicals were cheap and people would just use them on a kind of a preventative basis.
Okay.
Those days are gone.
Are gone, yay.
Now they're
Good.
now they're only targeting when they have a pest. And
Okay.
I had a call right before we walked in here, and a farmer was wanting to know, okay, when should I be worried about this particular pest? I don't want to spray until I have to.
Okay.
And what can I use? And his question was, what's the safest product that I can use
Really
that'll
good
do the
deal.
job?
Good
so
deal.
even our professional growers are really attuned to
Attuned.
this. So when you buy local products at the farmer's market, you can be assured they haven't sprayed routinely for no reason.
Right.
They're targeting specific pests and using the least toxic product that'll do the job.
Wonderful. Such good tips this morning. As always good to see Tony. Always glad to have him here. Get those copies. I know you've already seen that, but Garden Bugs, it's a great thing. I hope he'll leave these two with us today.
Yeah,
so
you
we
can pick them
take
up
a
at
look
our office
Yeah.
or call if you can't come by, and we'll get you one in the mail.
All right, great. Thank you, Tony. And thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed today. We'll see you.